Hello everyone, thank you very much for coming. I'm Arrian Ebrahimi, a student at St. Edward's University in Austin and a Texas Civic Ambassador with UT Austin's Annette Strauss Institute for Civic Life. We're thrilled that you're taking the time tonight to be part of this conversation about the judicial selection process in Texas. Of our three branches of government, the judiciary is often the most difficult one for people, especially young folks, to civically engage with. But it is also the branch that may most directly impact our lives in situations of conflict. Given this, and with potential changes being considered to how Texas selects judges, we wanted to offer this panel as an opportunity to hear from three leaders at the cutting edge of Texas law, politics, and journalism. Judge Bert Richardson serves on the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, our state's Supreme Court for criminal cases. He graduated from high school in San Antonio, received his BS from Brigham Young University, and his JD from St. Mary's University School of Law. From 1988 to 1999, he served as an assistant district attorney in Bexar County and an assistant U.S. attorney for the Western District of Texas. He was appointed to the 379th District Court by Governor George W. Bush in 1999 and served in that position until 2009. As a senior visiting judge from 2009 to 2014, he presided over a wide variety of civil and criminal matters throughout the state, and he was elected to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals in 2014. Earlier this year, he won his contested Republican primary and is up for re-election this November. Representative Ina Minjarez was elected to the Texas legislature after winning a special election in 2015. She was soon after named Texas Monthly's Rookie of the Year and carried on as a member of the House Committee on Appropriations, House Committee on Redistricting, House Committee on Land and Resource Management, as well as serving on the very first Criminal Justice Reform Caucus. In the 86th legislative session, Representative Minjarez was a Democratic co-sponsor of the bipartisan HB 3040, which established the Commission on Judicial Selection, on which she is currently serving, and which will be a major topic for our discussion tonight. Finally, Emma Platoff covers justice, politics, and now COVID-19 for the Texas Tribune, where she started as an intern in 2017. She's authored award-winning coverage of Texas courts. A graduate of Yale University, she's also the former editor of the Yale Daily News. The panel will be divided into two parts, focusing first on Texas's current system of selecting judges, and second on the potential reforms being considered. We'll save about 10 minutes at the end for an audience Q&A, where I highly urge the students watching to use the Raise My Hand feature under the Participants tab, and I'll call on you to ask your question. Without further ado, I'd like to open by asking each of the panelists to briefly explain how you are involved with the topic of judicial selection. Judge Richardson, you can go first.
Because I'm a candidate. We kind of joked when we got started. I think I got picked tonight because I have been appointed. I have been elected 1, 2, 3, 4 times. I've won contested primaries, and I've had the distinct pleasure of being defeated in a partisan sweep. So I have a pretty good idea how the system works. I think I'm intimately familiar with the pros and cons of each, and having campaigned all over the state, both in 2014 and most recently in my primary election, I'm mindful of what a lot of people think about it. There's really some strong feelings on whether we get away from electing judges or appointing judges. And depending on what party you're running in, those feelings can run quite strong. So I'm frequently asked, well, what would I prefer? And my answer is, I take an oath to follow the Constitution and laws of the state. The current system requires that judges get elected. And unless I'm on some committee or brought before a committee, I just try to say, this is the system we have, and until it changes, I follow it. But I'm very mindful of the problems that we face in our judiciary. And it doesn't have as much to do with partisan politics as it has to do with maintaining stability within our legal system. Lawyers and people come to the court. As you noted, most of us will never meet a senator. Most of us will never meet a president. Some of us are lucky to get to know representatives like I know Ina, but the reality is that we won't meet them either. The places where we wind up in our community are in the courtrooms. People get divorced, there's crimes, you're victims, you're charged. Something as insignificant as a traffic ticket. And so I frequently tell people, those are the races that you should really pay close attention to. And those are the positions that really should require some qualifications in our communities. And if I had any beef with what currently goes on in Texas and how judges get elected, it's that frequently we elect judges based solely on party affiliation, and they're not qualified. And I have a lot of ideas on how the system could be improved, but I'll just leave it at that.
All right, that's a great introduction. Next, I think we'll go to Representative Minjarez. How did you get involved with the issue of judicial selection?
Sure, good evening. It's good to see you all. Thank you for having me. So I come from, it's a little different perspective. I had run before for a county court at law bench back in 2006 in Bert County. And that was the year that there was a partisan sweep. I believe Obama was the president. Was it 2006 or 2010? There was a sweep. The Democrats all lost. And I found that it just really made an impact on me. Number one, understanding judges are placed at the bottom of the ballot. And then taking note of the fact that, you know, did voters really know or know who was on the ballot running for these judicial positions? Of course, there's emphasis at the top of the ballot, but it seemed once they got voter fatigue, they didn't know who was running for benches. And so I had an interest in it. And when I got to the legislature in 2015, just doing some regular research, I found that there had been a number of bills proposed about maybe changing the way judges are elected. There were bills regarding creating commissions. And my dear friend, Representative Justin Rodriguez, who since left the legislature to become a commissioner in Bexar County, he had carried a bill forming a commission to study judicial selection. And you know, it seemed that this past legislative session, another representative, Todd Hunter, carried this bill, same bill, and I joined on it as a Democrat because it proposed a study, and I wanted the opportunity to really research and understand, you know, the process and get public input on how citizens of Texas feel about this. And it's just not in terms of selecting judges. We're also looking at possible campaign finance reform, whether, you know, judges should be getting, you know, contributions from lawyers, maybe that have cases pending before them. We're looking at, you know, should terms be extended for judges? So there's a lot that we're just really delving into and talking about. You know, should they be selected on a nonpartisan basis, maybe taken out of a gubernatorial or presidential election and maybe put at a separate time for, say, example, like city council races where the ballot is a lot shorter and they don't get lost in the process. So it's just, you know, I stress that the bill is one where it's a study and of course, welcoming input and having a lot of discussion. And so that's how I got involved in this commission.
Awesome, thanks, Representative. And you touched on a few things that we'll hopefully be able to get into with some more detail later on. All right, and last, Emma, if you could just talk about how you got involved with the issue of judicial selection.
Thank you, and thanks for having me and for hosting this event. The way I see it, my job as a reporter covering state government is to help Texans understand the people who they elect and who we pay with our tax dollars to do our business. I think Judge Richardson made a really great point that although folks may interact with judges, they have very little sense of what they do and they have very little sense of who they're electing. One thing we always look at in journalism is what are the motives of our elected officials? You know, why is the governor acting this way? Why is a representative filing this bill or voting this way on a bill? And a huge window into those motivations is in campaign finance, right? If you represent a district with a huge meatpacking plant, it's not surprising that you might file legislation advocating for those people who are your constituents. But it's a totally different scenario with judges, because we don't elect judges to represent me or you or anyone on any particular side of an issue. We elect judges to be impartial. So anytime you are electing someone to be totally fair and neutral, but we know that they have to, just by virtue of the system they're forced into, they have to accept contributions from partisan actors, from lobbyists, from big business, often from the lawyers who appear before them, that automatically raises questions about whether they're acting in the best interest of the public, whether they're acting in their best understanding of the law, or whether they have other motivations. And judges themselves are some of the biggest critics of this system, right? I think Judge Richardson would tell you it's terrible to run a campaign as a judge. It's really hard. And the appearance of impropriety is one of the things they hate most about it. I think most judges in Texas really do their best to act fairly in any case they hear, but the fact that there are questions is something that's really important for us to report on. So when I got to Texas and I learned, to my immense surprise, that judges here are not only elected, but elected on a partisan ballot, I thought this is a really important thing for me to help Texans understand.
Awesome, thanks, Emma. And you discuss a few issues, including campaign finance, and those will also come up during the following sections. So now I kind of want to transition into the more substantive parts of this discussion. For the first half, I want to discuss how Texas's system currently works, because a lot of the people attending might not be perfectly familiar with how judges are selected. So Emma, I'm going to start with you again on this. Could you just quickly also give a rundown of how does the process currently work of how Texas selects judges, and what is the state of the judicial selection debate?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Texas, there are three major levels to the judiciary. You have the two high courts, the Texas Supreme Court and the Texas Court for Criminal Appeals. There are a number, more than a dozen, of intermediate appellate courts, and these are sort of regional. So there are two big courts that serve Houston and stuff like that. Then the bottom is district courts, trial courts, where you think of traffic tickets and kind of more routine cases. And the judges who serve on all of those courts are elected on a partisan ballot. So they run with a party. Their terms vary in length, and some of them are elected statewide and some are elected more regionally. And the exception to that system is appointment, which is something we see actually fairly often. So for example, a justice on the Texas Supreme Court resigned earlier this year. So right now they have 8 members, and Governor Abbott is empowered to appoint a replacement. So that's the only time we see judges land in these positions without being elected to them. But obviously, when you're appointed by a governor who also ran with a political party, that is not a process that's divorced from politics.
Great, thanks. Hopefully that provides people a good starting point so we're all on the same basic page. Judge Richardson, I'll go next to you. You've talked about your campaigning experience and its highs and lows. Just what are some of the questions that voters ask you as a judge candidate when you're on the trail?
Let me just back up for a second, just point out a couple things that the audience may not be aware of. Emma explained the selection process very well. In a lot of the municipal courts, though, the judges are appointed. The JP judges are elected. And then there's this section of the judiciary that's floating out there that nobody ever knows anything about, which I did for 6 years. And so you've got the county court, you've got your elected judges at the trial level, the intermediate appellate court level, and in the two high courts. But floating out there in the state of Texas are 11 judicial administrative regions. Each of those regions has a presiding judge that is appointed by the governor. And their responsibility is to make sure that the courts within their region have judges. If elected judges are sick, they're recused, they pass away, which creates a possibility of an appointment for filling that vacancy. When stuff comes up, they have to have judges to fill them. I compare them to a school principal, and they have a list of substitute teachers they call. And if you've been elected twice in the state of Texas, you can become a visiting judge. If you've been a judge long enough, they call you a senior visiting judge. I don't really know what the distinction is, other than it makes you sound like you're old. but you become eligible to sit anywhere in the state of Texas without being elected. And you can serve in any of those 11 judicial administrative regions, which is what I did for 6 years. I worked in over 50 counties, and you get, essentially, a lot of those judges get the hot potato cases nobody else wants, because they're not running for election. They're not asking for any campaign contributions. We joke about it and call it R&R, rule and run. Get in, get out, follow the rule of law, and leave as fast as you can. So on that note, I'm mindful of the fact that the appearance of accepting campaign contributions, it's difficult, but essentially the Constitution and the legislature have forced us into this role. And in order to run for office, it costs money. And if you're running statewide, it costs more money. But what's kind of interesting is if you look at the various races and you see the contributions that come in, it's interesting to compare the different races and see who gets the most money and who gets the least. Most people would be surprised. I think I was interviewed by the Dallas Morning News once, and they said, well, what's it like running a statewide race with just $400,000? I said, where'd you get that figure? I'm lucky if I get 60 or 70,000 to run a statewide race, where in a local race, the district court judges might get 150 or 2,000. And the Texas Supreme Court justices, their bank balances or their campaign balances are anywhere from 500,000 to $1 million. So, all you have to do is just step back and see who's pouring money into those races. And it does create kind of this difficult appearance, and judges have to be careful how they do that and how they rule, so the public doesn't get disgruntled with their requirement to be fair and impartial to all the parties. But the reality is we have to run in partisan elections. Most of us, once we get into this position, we don't like it. We don't like asking for money. That's the worst part of campaigning, is asking people to give me money. But for example, I had a very difficult primary. I had to raise money and do social media ads, get push cards, travel all over the state. And it's just part of it. And until the legislature decides to change the system, this is what we're stuck with. And we have to try our hardest to be fair and impartial to all the parties that appear in front of us.
Thanks, Judge. That's really insightful and kind of gives us a way to see into what it's like from the perspective of the candidate. And actually, Representative Minjarez, I had another question, but I kind of want to piggyback on something that Judge Richardson said. Since you've had the experience of running for both a judicial position and a political position, could you compare the differences in terms of questions people ask you, as well as just the overall experience?
Sure. I think one of the things that's really hard, I think, for judicial candidates is, there are judicial ethics involved where they're not, and Judge Richardson can talk about this, they can't comment on how they feel, their personal beliefs on certain issues. For example, I'm a state representative and I get asked all the time, where am I on the issue of abortion? Where are you on the issue of guns? Where are you on LGBTQ issues? And those I can talk about my opinion and how I feel about those issues. Whereas judges or judicial candidates cannot. But they get asked those questions all the time. And when they talk to the voters and tell them ethically they cannot answer those questions, voters get upset because they don't believe that. But in terms of running for office, it's very similar. You've got to declare a party. You've got to pay the fee to get on the ballot, and you've got to run a primary. But I think the difference is in terms of what you can speak on and what you cannot speak on. So it's very tricky.
I agree 100%. It's like threading a needle.
Right.
It's a really tough balancing act. And actually, let's get one more perspective on this. Emma, as a reporter who will report on both politicians and judges, for you, how is it different? What's your different approach in terms of asking questions given the ethics codes that judge candidates are under?
That's a really good question. I mean, the big thing is you can't, you ask a judge, why should I vote for you? I mean, first of all, for everyone in the audience, let's just imagine that to keep your job, you have to run a statewide campaign for 29, you have to get, 29 million Texans to support you. and you have 50 grand to do it. So that's a tough position to be in. But now imagine you're trying to persuade these people on why they should vote for you, except you can't tell them what you'll do except that you'll be fair and follow the law, which, by the way, is the same thing that every other candidate for judge is going to say. And this actually gets at one of the arguments, whether people think it's persuasive or not, for judicial elections being tied to party, right? Because I may ask the candidates for Texas Supreme Court of Republican and Democrat tickets, I might say, how are you different from your opponent? And a lot of those questions they can't answer because of the codes of judicial ethics. They can't say how they might rule in a case they might hear. They can't say a certain opinion from the past was wrong. But voters get a little bit of information when they see which party the candidate has chosen to align with. So if you're someone who's progressive, it might be encouraging to you to see that this person has signed up to run as a Democrat, even though that person is not going to likely say on the campaign trail, or should not, according to the canons of judicial ethics, say, by the way, I'm gonna, uphold gay marriage on the court, or something like that.
I think they can also, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think some of the things that they've been able to do is maybe talk about how many cases have come before the court and how they've been able to dispose of those cases, how many trials were presided on. So there are other things they can talk about in regards to the court in terms of how maybe they've been very efficient as judges and making sure that taxpayer money wasn't wasted. And then maybe talking about if they did anything innovative. For example, some of the judges had created veterans courts or drug courts, or, they've been innovative. They can talk about initiatives like that they've been able to do. But, Emma's right. It's very difficult for them in terms of talking about issues and staying within judicial ethics.
Judge Richardson, on what Representative Minjarez just said, she brought up some points that, actually I hadn't thought of before, and those do sound like things that sound like actual qualifications or past credits that would be relevant for someone trying to decide who's the best choice for a judge. How do voters respond if you talk about issues like that? Are they interested?
Yeah, I think they are. It's kind of interesting that when you look at the candidates at the different levels, as you move up the ladder, I think all judicial positions are important. They're equally as important. We just have different roles. I found early in my career as a district court judge, there's always this perception that the Democrats are more liberal and they're more fair and they'll go easier on the defendants. I never found that to be accurate. I found some of the Democratic judges that I worked with to be very hard on crime and doling out very harsh sentences. They were all within the zone of discretion. But I think as you move up the chain, go up the courts, then what you're going to find there at the appellate court level and the high court levels is the judicial philosophies, much like you see at the U.S. Supreme Court. You have the Scalia philosophy, which is a textualist. I agree with, I'm going to follow the law just as it was written. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Says, well, look, I think the Constitution is a living document and we should be able to expand those rights. That's the real distinction between probably a conservative versus a liberal candidate. But what was your original question?
I think we've gone into a bit of a very valuable rabbit hole about judicial ethics and what you are and are not allowed.
I think it was something like, what are the qualifications? So, for example, when I'm out campaigning, I just say, look, I've been a state and federal prosecutor. I've been a trial and appellate lawyer. I'm board certified in criminal law. Board certification, I think, is important. And I don't know if the committee is looking at that, but it sets you apart from a lot of the other lawyers because you have to meet minimum requirements. You have to get recommendations from judges and people you've tried cases against. And it shows that you have attained a level of proficiency of trying the types of cases in your specialty that are required, and you have to take an all-day exam. And then you can talk about how many cases you've tried, what you've done. I won't bore you with what I've done. I won't give you a stump speech, but that's really kind of what we're limited to as judicial candidates.
Got it. And that actually segues pretty well into the what I think is really the core second part of this conversation about the potential reforms being considered by the Commission on Judicial Selection, and qualifications are definitely one of those factors. Maybe we could start this section then with Representative Minjarez as a member of the commission. Could you first explain, and you touched on this earlier, but what is the Commission on Judicial Selection and what plans are being considered?
So the bill provided that a judicial commission be formed, that they be appointed by, members of the commission will be appointed by Speaker of the House, Lieutenant Governor, and the Governor. I was surprised to be actually appointed on the commission, but I was happy to serve. So you've got senators on the commission, you've got House of representatives on the commission. There are Democrats and Republicans. You have former judges on the commission, and you have attorneys that are on the commission. And essentially what we're doing is having hearings. So a couple of hearings we've had some proposals brought forth by organizations. One in particular was TLR, Texans for Lawsuit Reform. They submitted a proposal that they advocated for, which called for, at the end of the day, the governor having appointment power. We've had public hearings to hear from members of the public, from lawyers, from judges, from different benches, taking in their beliefs. And so there have been different proposals, but again, the purpose of the commission under this bill is it is a study. So a study that will be completed by December, I believe that's when the report will be due, and it will contain different proposals. So right now, the important thing is getting input from the public. It's anywhere from, should the governor have full appointment power? Should there be a neutral commission that vets a pool of possible judicial applicants, and then narrow that down and give that to the governor for selection? Should there be retention elections? We're looking at different states to see what they do. So right now it's just looking at different proposals and seeing what we come up with. I'm interested to see when we come together as a commission towards the end of the year, and how all of us, what we all think about the different proposals that have been submitted and how many of us agree and disagree. What I can accurately say, I feel comfortable saying, is that I don't think many of us on the commission are in favor of taking Texans' rights away from voting for their judges. That is a right that should not be taken away, and I don't think many of us are comfortable with that notion.
Very fascinating, and it's a whole bunch of different things we can consider too, and
Sure.
in a lot of gray area between all of that. So we really appreciate your service on that commission. And maybe now that we're you touched on the idea of at the end of the year there will be a proposal made, and then that'll go to the legislature. Emma, do you think you could talk about how through your reporting you've seen different populations in the state being for or against some of the proposals?
Absolutely. So the Texas legislature meets in January. The legislature, for those who don't know, meets for about 6 months every 2 years. So this will be their first time convening in a while. A good rule of thumb that I learned when I started covering the Capitol is that it's much easier to kill a bill than it is to pass a bill. So this has always been a really, really tricky issue. This is not the first year the legislature is taking a serious look at judicial selection, but it has never really gone anywhere in the past because there's so many ways to fight something that you don't like at the legislature. And at any given time, there's always different groups who are for and against whatever you're proposing. So in a recent example, in the 2019 session last year, there was a Republican in the Texas House who proposed a bill that would have reformed the system, basically shifting to a gubernatorial appointment system with, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, an approval process in the Texas Senate. And the bill died because Democrats on the committee were not interested in passing it. And the reason, and some of them were very candid with me about this, was that Texas is held by Republicans. I don't think that's news to anyone, but Democrats have really started to make major gains, especially on the courts and especially in the 2018 midterm elections.
is the value of this discussion, given the difficulty of the issue. To a great degree, it's also just understanding how the system works, what are the repercussions of it, and what are the political camps, so to speak, on this. So on that note, one group that I've seen giving a lot of comments during commission hearings has actually been judges who have been testifying about their own experiences with the current system. I was wondering, Judge Richardson, do you think you could say, do you have a sense of how currently serving judges feel about the various proposals?
It's all over the map. Having campaigned most recently, I have a pretty good idea what members of at least my political party think, but there's different factions there. Most of the judges who get into office, I think would probably prefer some sort of a retention system once they get in. None of us like to run. I mean, we just don't. I mean, it's because once we take that oath of office to follow the Constitution, we set aside those partisan labels in order to reach our decisions on the bench. At least that's the goal, and it can be very difficult. And I've kind of been in the crosshairs of those types of decisions just as a judge myself. I presided over Governor Perry's case in 2014, and it just was not it was not an enjoyable experience. It was difficult. The legal issues were difficult, and I think most of us would like the comfort of, once we get into office, relying on the public to keep us in on retention elections. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the public. How that gets resolved, how the legislature resolves it, and then what the citizens of this state vote for. I'm just mindful of the fact that I have to run for office. I've been appointed. I tell people, look, I've been appointed, I've been elected, so whatever you make me do, I'm going to do it. And I've been okay, even though I've been defeated once before.
Got it. And so, Judge Richardson, I just asked you about how judges feel. And I do actually think the more important question would be toward Representative Minjarez about how constituents feel about this. But just before I go there, I don't want to take for granted that people are familiar with our vocabulary. Judge Richardson, could you quickly explain what a retention election is and what it would mean if we switch to that?
Well, I think there's different ones, and Ina might be more informed about it than I am. What I've understood in the past is judges either initially get elected or they get appointed. Once they get appointed, then every 4 years or 6 years or 10 years, the general public has the opportunity to vote them out of office. Say, look, you've been such a disaster on the bench, we can't take you anymore. So they just basically vote you out, and then somebody gets to come back in. But I think there's several different plans. The Missouri plan is the one that pops up most often, but I'll let Ina chime in on that. I'm not that educated on it.
No, that's about right. That's about right. And there's also other models where, again, when I mentioned the discussion of appointing a commission of, a neutral commission, where they will technically look at a judge and score them like a scorecard on judicial temperament, how they're moving their dockets, and then come up with a grade for that judge, so a pass-fail type of thing. So these are all different methods, but we're looking at different states. So yeah, there's always one where they always propose a neutral commission that will be comprised of a number of people that will issue a scorecard for a judge, and then that will be determined how they're looked at on the ballot and whether they'll be able to stay or not.
Right, and I think you just said kind of the key word there, neutral.
Neutral.
And how, when constituents hear that you're on this commission, considering all these things, they hear words like neutral and commission, and they're like, well, I'm probably not going to be on that commission. What do they usually say to you?
Is there such a thing as neutral? There's always going to be political undertones and political overtones. And, constituents, whether they are Republican or Democrat or independent or don't vote, when I've spoken to them about what I do on this commission, the number one concern they don't want the right to vote taken from them. They want to be able to elect the judges. They're not comfortable with an appointment power by the governor. And they feel, and some of them feel it may not be, you can have a Republican constituent that says, I'm not comfortable with that, because there's going to come a time when Texas may flip and we may have a Democratic governor, and I'm not going to be comfortable with a Democratic governor picking judges. You can say it's going to be a fair, neutral process, but they don't trust the system. They believe politics will be involved, and it's not going to be a fair shot. So they feel very comfortable, and they strongly have told me and advocated that they want to continue electing their judges.
That's very interesting and probably expectable. When you have a power, people don't usually want to give up the power, no matter who you are. But given that great discomfort with Texas's system of electing judges in partisan elections, what is their stance then on, or what would they say about the federal system, which is obviously the direct opposite, and which we're seeing going on right now?
Well, I think for them, they don't really touch upon the federal system. I know a lot of them, of course, have their concerns about who are potential appointments, especially on the Supreme Court. You know, that is very political. But I guess that's why they are so vocal and so adamant that they preserve the right to vote on a state level for their judges. So I think one of the things that they talked about, I think what's important for them, I asked, well, what do you propose? If there needs to be a change, what do you suggest? And some of the suggestions from constituents have been, well, maybe we need to change the qualifications of a judge in terms of.
I agree. I really agree with
Yeah,
that.
I agree. Me too.
You know, right now, if you've been a lawyer for 4 years, you can run, and it's happened in my hometown. Or if you've been a lawyer for 10 years, you can run for a high court, and that's the only qualification out there.
Right. So they're talking about maybe so that is one of the areas I didn't mention we're talking about as a commission are the qualifications. What will those be if we decide, to propose changes in that? But qualifications is something that we're talking about. And again, the other consideration is constituents have said, hey, can we pick judges on a nonpartisan basis, just like we do in city council here in San Antonio, and move the judicial races to the San Antonio ballot, city council ballot? So these are all different proposals, but remember, what may be proposed for San Antonio and urban core may not be something that will work in a rural part of Texas, right? So we need to make sure that we really take a look at this and really scrub through the different proposals that are put forward. But I agree with Emma. I think this is a situation that it's going to be very hard if there are proposals that are made into legislation this next legislative session, because we've got a budget we've got to work on in light of the pandemic and in light of the fact that oil and gas is not doing well. That is our real main source of revenue. And we've got redistricting. So I just think that there are going to be other priorities to look at, and this is going to be very difficult in terms of having any resolution next session.
Absolutely, and in many ways, the difficulty and the other priorities kind of have the benefits, so to speak, of having it be a lengthier conversation, more time to consider. But you guys did actually the grander ideas I think most people think of when we talk about judicial selection is elected or appointed. But I think you and Judge Richardson were just talking about some of those significant gray areas of qualifications. Districts, which nonpartisan, partisan. I would like to kind of see like how important those are to different people. And Emma, I'm curious on the first one, as this is the one I hear most often about qualifications. As a reporter, how would you report on a judge who is grossly unqualified? Would you just call them that, or is it something relevant for you as a reporter?
Absolutely. We're talking about the challenges of judging the judges, right, as you're trying to choose them. The things we can point to, my fellow panelists have made really great points about this, is experience and efficiency. That's basically what you can do. But the challenge, both for me as a reporter and for the candidates, is that voters, while they overwhelmingly say, we value the right to elect our judges, we want to keep doing it, don't take it away, they also don't know who they're voting for in the vast majority of cases. I would be hard pressed to find a random Texan on the street who can identify a single judge on the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, with apologies to you, Judge Richardson. But
No, I get it. I mean, there's no apology needed. I deal with it every day.
and I think especially Texas is such a diverse state, and you're talking about so many different places. But when you think about a city like Houston, of 2.4 million registered voters, there are dozens, sometimes something like 100, just lower court district judges on the ballot. And I talk to high profile attorneys, even judges in Houston, and they say, it is hard for me to keep track of 100 races. And that's just for the district courts, right? That's after you voted for a president, for a US senator, for your state representatives. It's really hard for voters to be educated about every judge they're voting for. Obviously, that's a little bit different if you live in a rural county where you're maybe electing one judge instead of dozens at a time. And that's where retention elections and these other kind of more granular changes come into play. If we could at least guarantee a standard floor, you know, every judge has at least this many years of experience or has this certification, does that make it easier for voters to choose between them? Or retention elections where you're basically, you don't have to choose between A or B, you're just saying, you know, thumbs up, thumbs down on this judge. And these are all, I think, valid questions for the commission to keep looking at and for lawmakers to consider.
That's great, and it's come up a couple of times as well. So I do want to touch on this a little bit more deeply. The idea of urban versus rural counties, and you know that the realities in those places are totally different. I go to school in Austin. Representative Minjarez, you represent San Antonio, but I think we have a unique point of view here from Judge Richardson, because you run statewide, you have to go statewide. So I presume that you've been campaigning in urban and rural counties, and in the process, I assume you've also met judges who have smaller jurisdictions in rural versus urban counties. You think maybe you could talk about what those judges that you've met, their experiences have been running in an urban versus rural area?
Is that for me or for Ina?
For you, maybe like the other
Yeah,
candidates.
you know, I think the big difference in those communities is that people actually know the candidates. And so it's easier to make an informed decision. And it's easier to vote them out of office if they don't like what they're doing. And that's the major difference. In Bexar County, you know, they have, even, you know, where I'm from, there's just so many lawyers the general public can't possibly know who's the most qualified and who's not, unless they have the financial means to get the message out. In the rural areas, and I worked in over 50 counties across the state, and a lot of those are very small counties. Everybody knows everybody. Usually when you pick a jury, half of them are related to each other. So it's just a real cultural difference.
Got it. That's helpful. And before we transition to the Q&A, we have about 15 minutes left right now. Representative Minjarez, maybe a good way to kind of close off the main part of this discussion would be, obviously we've discussed the bigger issues of election appointment are going to be much more difficult to discuss just generally and right now given COVID and redistricting. What about the more modest proposals, though, of qualifications and urban versus rural? Is this something that, even if it's not a top priority at the moment, your colleagues on the commission might be more receptive to?
I think that they may, and I think, you know, aside from the commission's work, a legislator at any time can go file their own bills on this stuff. So, you know what, we don't know what could be filed by another representative or senator that's not part of this commission, first of all. But I think there's a general consensus about needing to reevaluate the qualifications, you know, for the benches that are sought. But then again, I feel with COVID happening, I think that caused a delay for us to meet for a while. Luckily, we've been able to resume online and virtually, but we're stacked up against a deadline because the report is due in December. And where that's been the hardest thing about the pandemic, where we were looking forward to having regular hearings, and then we were going to travel the state which would have made it easier for anybody that would have come and testified that wanted to before us. That was a problem. It became very limited. So, you know, I wish we could have done more. Unfortunately, the pandemic did restrain us a bit.
Restrained everyone.
Yeah.
And do you think, regardless of what's actually able to be done in the legislature, do you think it would be possible for the commission to get a renewal of its charter, so to speak, with the new bill to continue work? Or do you think it might just like die after December and never be heard from again?
You know, that might depend. You know, if the Texas House flips into Democratic control, this maybe the renewal of the commission may not be a thing. It may just be coming to an end. If Republicans retain control of the House, possibly there may be a continuation. But again, it's hard. It's a hard call because we have, again, we do have priorities. One, by law, we have to pass a budget, and that's going to take, that's going to be a fight between the House and the Senate, as it usually is. You know, we've got this pandemic has devastated the Texas economy, and we got to be focused on that. And redistricting is the next battle, and that is going to take us, I think, into a special session next year. So I just think, I don't know if the commission will get renewed. We'll see.
Understood. A lot of battles to be fought right now. It's crazy how everything's kind of just come at once. So anyway, with that said, and I want to make sure we can wrap up before the hour's over, because I know a lot of people are going to want to watch the vice presidential debate. But quickly into a Q&A, we're going to transition right now. And if you have a question, please use the raise your hand button under the participants tab. I do see that a lot of people have also written into the chat box. And I'll call on you to ask your questions. And I think first we'll start with Taylor Newman. So Cole Bianca or Katya, if you could unmute Taylor, we'd love to hear your question. Trying on Zoom, so let's see how this works. Actually, in the meantime, just so we're not taking up too much time while we wait for this to work, on the question of with what COVID has done, creating the different priorities, are we going to have the same committee process with everything moving piece to piece? I think it would be relevant because a bill like this would probably want to be heard by multiple committees in both houses.
So what'll happen on the House side, a couple things. We have to pick a new Speaker of the House, so the process would start all over. We have to pick a new Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House and his team will have to appoint members to different committees. And then he or she will determine where that bill will go. So depending on how the bills are filed and the sequence, what number it gets, you know, you want to file your bills early so you get a lower bill number, because those will get sent to a committee faster and get the ball rolling. So there's a lot of factors, but it's just going to determine, you know, what committee that gets sent to. And then what is the will of the House? What is the will of the members? And what is the will of that committee? I think it was mentioned earlier, I think Emma mentioned that, you know, a bill had been heard before a committee and the Democrats essentially killed that bill. So it may end up the same way. Or, you know, if you get a committee full of people that love a particular bill, they can get out of committee. But then again, it goes through a process. Then it's got to go to the calendars committee and then get to the floor. And as Emma perfectly stated, it's easier to kill a bill than it is to pass it.
That's true of life. All right, so I think Taylor left. So let's see if we can get Hadil to ask our first question.
Oh, hi. So I wrote a question in the chat talking about, just in the very beginning, you guys referenced a lot of how something in the legislature and Constitution backs running judges or running potentials to take compensation from other sources in order to campaign successfully. What is that? What is it in the Constitution that limits your ability, and so you have to go to other sources for compensation?
I think what it is there are ethics laws, not the Constitution. There's ethics rules. So there's campaign finance rules, depending on what office you run for, and then that lays out, whether it specifically who you can take money from. Are there limits to how much you can take? Are there caps? So there are campaign finance rules that you've got to follow depending on what office you file for. So they're different for everyone. Like a congressional candidate, someone running from Congress, will be different from someone running for state rep.
That's an interesting point, and I remember. Thank you, Hadil, for the question. Campaign finance is a really big elephant in the room on this topic. And Emma, I think you mentioned this at the start of the chat, and I promised we were going to get to it, but we didn't have a chance to go in too much depth. One thing I'm wondering is, and forgive my own ignorance on the issue, are these campaign finance rules or are these judicial ethics rules? Are they set by the legislature or by some sort of judicial council? And if it is a judicial council, who's on there? Are they neutral?
There are some campaign finance restrictions that are, I believe, in state law. I don't actually know, Judge Richardson, you may have to jump in and save me. I don't actually know who is the author of the judicial ethics rules.
Ina would probably know more than I do. I'm familiar with the rules. I don't know who made them.
I think over time, different
them.
legislators over time have filed bills, and then they go under the purview of the Ethics Commission to determine. They kind of serve as a gatekeepers to make sure that candidates are following these, guidelines in terms of campaign finance. So I think it starts legislatively as a bill over time, and then the Ethics Commission is the governing body to make sure that candidates and/or elected officials are abiding by those campaign finance rules.
What is fascinating that I find that is, so I see in the state system, on the state level, at least in Texas, it's more legislative, which we could call more democratic. It would address a lot of the issues that people have had about unknown appointers. But federally, I do know. Chief Justice John Roberts heads the Judicial Council, and most of those rules of ethics would be set by judges. So it's a fascinating difference there, and definitely brings up conflicts of interest. I do want to remind all of the attendees that if you want to ask a question, we are going through the chat, but the easiest way would be if you raised your hand. You just have to click on the participants button, and then your name would pop right up. In the meantime, I see one panelist, one attendee, Warren. You had a question about term limits. Any chance we could hear what your idea was on that, and maybe the panelists could respond?
Who goes first? Who's on first?
It would be Warren Wolf. If not, maybe I could just read your question. So Warren suggests term limits and saying give judges 10 years and then give someone else a chance to run instead of having incumbents. So I'm assuming it's like a one lengthy term. What would be both the commission's and also maybe Judge Richardson, your thoughts on that? A single lengthy term.
I think the problem with term limits for the judiciary is our ability to make a living is limited to being on the bench as opposed to legislators. And so when we decide to take that career path, we are stepping out of either a private practice or a government position, which would give us the comfort of doing the job we want and making a living. And, if you step out of that role at a certain point in your life, stepping back into it becomes very difficult. And I think you would discourage people from doing it, and qualified candidates. If somebody told me, look, you're only going to be a judge for 10 years at the time I was appointed, I'd say you can find somebody else. being mindful of the fact that I had to run and I had to get elected. I think you throw away a lot of qualified jurists if you decide to go down that road. There's some expectation that the judges you appear in front of are knowledgeable, they're experienced, they know what they're doing, and they've been at it for a long time. And if they're doing a lousy job, just vote them out of office.
Got it. Fascinating. And I mean, obviously, the other end of that would be lifetime appointment, but I think that definitely has its own issues. We have 4 minutes left, and I do want to get to Lauren, who has her hand raised for a question. Actually, I think you can unmute yourself now at this point.
Hi. Okay. Well, thank you, every panelist, for such a great job. This has been really informative. I wanted to ask, is anyone willing to give a probability that the judicial selection in Texas will change anytime soon, or the likelihood of that it will change in the near future? Is anyone willing to go out on a limb and talk about actual likelihood here?
No. I don't have any idea. Like, Ina and Emma might know, but I don't have any idea, to be honest with you.
If I were a betting woman, which I am not, I would not put money on a major change in the 2019 session. I think it's a little bit harder to talk about the odds of something more granular, like maybe increasing the qualification requirements or something like that.
Yeah, I agree.
I'll let the lawmakers speak.
No, I agree. And this is just from someone that kind of knows what we're going into for next legislative session. And again, we stress it's easier to kill a bill than it is to pass one. And not only does it have to get, from my perspective, not only does it have to get out of the House, it has to get out of the Senate as well. So you've got 2 chambers it's got to get through, and then to the governor's desk, and governor can always veto if he doesn't like the bill. So I think it's hard. It's going to be really, really hard.
Well, I worked in the Texas Senate during the 29 session, and it's definitely hard to get to the Senate. On that note, and being again mindful of the time, I'd like to thank everyone, and especially thank you the panelists for taking the time to talk with us today. This is a really important issue, and I'm glad we've been able to talk about it. But most especially, I appreciate all of you who attended tonight. Some of you may know this panel was originally scheduled as an in-person event in March, but COVID obviously threw a wrench in that. I dare to say, however, that this forum was better than any in-person event could have been, because we were able to reach out beyond Austin to students and voters of every stripe across the great state of Texas, from the Valley to Central Texas, to El Paso, to the Panhandle. I'll just leave you with a final message that there are voting resources linked in the chat box. So make sure you make your voices heard by November 3rd. And don't forget the down ballot state legislative and judicial races. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
And good night. Enjoy the vice presidential debate.
Bye, Ina.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Emma.
Bye-bye. Good to see you.
Take care.